Welcome back to Theology in Action. I'm Levi Hightree with Pastor Tony Caffey. How are you doing?
Hey, Levi. Good to see you.
Yeah, we've got our last core value today we're going through. It is multiplying the work of ministry in missions and church planting.
And this is the most ambitious of all of ours,
Yeah,
I would say, Levi.
It is. It's very forward thinking. So just kind of starting out general, what's at the heart of this? What spurred this up?
Well, I think it's an outgrowth of, Matthew 28. We've talked about that already, the nature of disciple making and how we're trying to accomplish that in our church body. But I think, and this is maybe just a math issue, if we keep making disciples, the church will grow, and there'll be a need for additional churches. Also, I would say, people move, people go to different places, and conceptually, in my mind, why not, if there's, in our modern day world, the opportunity to move and to reproduce what we've done here at Verse by Verse, that would be an amazing thing to do in terms of multiplying disciples, multiplying church planting. But also, I think in Matthew 28, there is that component of going, of moving, of even cross-culturally being a part of things that take place, outside of America, and being involved in the work of missions. And so I'm all for that. I love that. I've been involved in that for most of my ministry life, some kind of missions venture. But not just raw evangelism, as important as that is, or humanitarian stuff like we've talked about as well. But what are some ways that you can perpetuate a long-term disciple-making strategy? Wouldn't you know it, God has this great thing called the church, which we can be involved in, and we can plant churches. And this is something that the early church has done, and we've been involved in as part of the Church Universal for 2,000 years. And why not? Why not have Verse by Verse be a part of that work?
Yeah, interesting. So you're kind of saying planting churches is growth from just moving to different areas, and if we're growing in the building or following that discipleship, we might be bursting at the seams. Am I hearing you?
I think so. And we live in San Antonio, Texas. So some of this is, I think, strategic in terms of our location, because we live in a fast-growing area. The Austin, San Antonio metroplex is going to continue to grow, Lord willing, and there'll be more people coming in, more babies born in this area, more need for churches, and not just churches in general, but Bible teaching, gospel preaching churches, the other core commitments that we have, which, I personally want to be involved in multiplying churches. So.
Yeah. So I'll present to you a devil's advocate, which we kind of
I love that.
Talked about already a little bit. On the other side is, wouldn't it be more efficient to just make fewer, bigger churches? We can have more people, use more resources, more gifts in one building. Wouldn't that?
There is an argument for that.
Okay.
It's cost effective to do bigger. And the problem is, as churches, and I'm not against larger churches, and this is not a small churches are better than big churches argument, because I think that's a fallacy. Good churches are good churches, regardless of size. But I think instead of continuing to pool resources into one hub, it's better service to the community, better service to the local body, to have the multiplying of the work, to have multiple options, even more community-focused types of churches. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be either or, too. If the Lord continues to bless Verse by Verse, let's just say hypothetically, and we grow larger and we buy a space, praise God. But I hope that we don't do that without thinking about strategically ways that we can replicate what we're doing here. And I think, too, and we can get to this in a moment, one of the things that you're going to have if you have a bigger and bigger church that's really has one primary preaching pastor, there's a bottleneck there for leadership development and for preachers and teachers. So, instead of having one person preaching to 10,000 people, for instance, why not have, 10 people preaching at do the math right, 1,000-person churches, right?
Yeah.
10 people of 10 churches of 1,000 people. And I think that's a way to raise up leaders. I think that's a way to multiply the work. Again, it doesn't have to be either or. Sometimes the Lord, just continues to grow a church, and while there's still church planting, there's even a principle in that the Lord wants to bless those who are outward looking and blessing others and efficiently, making disciples, planting churches where more disciples are being raised up. So it doesn't have to be either or. But if it was, Tony, would you rather have a church of 10,000 or would you rather have 10 churches of 1,000? I'll take the second option, and I think that's a better, more effective way actually to reach people, even though maybe it's not the most cost-effective option.
Yeah, I lean toward that way as well, and I think back to going through school. I was public schooled, which I think I'm the minority in my friend group on that. But
Yeah.
I went to a small school, small town. My graduating class was by the time we graduated, 82 people, something like that. And there was benefit in that, in the fact that everyone kind of knew each other. Teachers knew each other. I tell the story of one of my senior teachers. His wife was my freshman English teacher. I was one of those students, just wasn't motivated, wasn't challenged, was very bored. Loved his class, and I didn't find out till a year after I graduated. It was because that he knew who I was, and because of that small community, he was actually creating homework that he knew would challenge me personally that no one else was doing, and I wasn't paying enough attention to notice it. But I think you can lose that if you start to get into bigger groups. And I think of accountability, I think of things like that might start to, that there's risk of kind of falling through the cracks in larger groups.
It can in smaller churches too. So so small town Levi. Welcome to San Antonio, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely.
8th largest city in the country right now.
Something like that. It's been an adjustment for sure.
I think you're right, though. I mean, there's a value in knowing your pastor, having connection with the elders, even you knowing them on a first name basis, vice versa. That's not always realistic in some settings or some churches, but I think that is good and healthy. I think it's easier to get lost in a large church, which is what you're saying. And, so if there's a way that we can strategically think about maximizing leadership, maximizing the disciples being made, but also the quality of disciples being made. So it's not just, some kind of machine cranking out new and newer disciples that are further and further disconnected from disciple makers, then that can be problematic as a church grows. But I think there's strong reasons logistically, I would say even biblically, to plant churches, to go for more in terms of churches than more disciples centralized in one locale. So that's not, a hill to die on, but I think the benefits of that outweigh maybe the benefits of a larger and larger church.
Yeah. I think biblically, I think back to Paul and leading up Timothy and the planting and things kind of taking off. And this is kind of just a logistics thing of thinking, but taking off some of the load and preparing for one. He knew he was coming to the end at some point, but so he wasn't having to travel. He could only do so much and could only go so far. And raising up those leaders, like you said, kind of spreads that workload. And you want a leader that's got depth, not just, for lack of a better, like a diploma that only got you so far. You want depth and experience in that.
You bring up a good point too, in terms of part of the biblical reasons for church planting come right out of the book of Acts. So here's Paul. Yeah. He's in Antioch. He's for lack of a better phrase right now, he's killing it there. Yeah. People getting saved, church is growing, got great leaders, everything is shipshape in Antioch. And yet he leaves and goes on, these missionary journeys. He gets beaten, he gets pummeled, he gets stoned at one point by people who at first, if I remember correctly, they thought he was a god, and then when he said he wasn't a god, they killed it. They tried to kill him, So, why would he do that? There was this drive inside of Paul, this passion to multiply the work, to not stay in Antioch to just continue to grow and to live a cushy life where things were great, but to go, I think in his own words, where nobody has gone before, where the ground has not been plowed already. And so we want to, I think as a church body, create that sense of desire. Let's multiply the work. If we have a certain level of health and good leadership, and there's other places around our area or even internationally that need good leadership, pioneering work, then let's be a part of that, and let's see what God might bless in terms of a faith venture to do a work of church planting.
Yeah. And even kind of talking about our verse-by-verse style, our expository style of teaching, they're out there, but it seems like they're the minority in as far as what type of churches are out there. And I hear a lot of people ask, how do I find a church that teaches like that? How do I find a church? And my mind always comes back to, how can we help that? Well, and this is it.
Yeah, and that's a dirty little secret in the Christian world, is that a lot of churches that are currently existing in America are not Bible teaching, gospel preaching churches. And also they're dying at a pretty high rate, a lot of mainline churches and others. So one of the reasons that we need to be invested in church planting, not just internationally, but also stateside, is because the churches aren't growing as fast as the needs are in our growing communities. And because the church closure rate in many places is higher than the church planting rate. Yeah. And so just because of math and numbers, we need more churches.
Yeah. So let's look at the missional side of it. What kind of broad stroke, what would you consider? Are you talking going and sharing the gospel, or going and planting churches abroad?
Yeah, I think it needs to be both.
Okay.
So international church planting, I've been involved in that in the past, and it's hard. It's hard work that needs a lot of strategic thinking. So, we're talking about this as one of our core values and something visional that we're trying to anticipate and move towards. But we're a long way from that.
Sure. In
terms of a church. We need the counsel of others, probably some parachurch organizations that can help us with that. But I would just say, it needs to be both. It needs to be, focused on evangelism that's backed by a disciple-making strategy that involves church planting. So, for example, we went on a mission trip this last year that was involved with a local church planting network that we are not involved in stateside. Not that we couldn't be involved in it. We're just not. So we used, or I should say, the parachurch ministry in cooperation with the local churches used us Americans who draw a lot of attention abroad to go and do kind of a seed planting venture, to go and just preach the gospel, share Christ, draw attention to the local work that God is doing in a locale, and I think it was effective. So we were able to do the evangelism side of things, and then other people, reputable people, were able to follow that up with a discipleship / church planting strategy. Now, maybe in someday in the future, we can be involved in all of that at verse by verse. I don't know. I would love to see that happening if the Lord doesn't come back before then. But that's definitely the goal, where evangelism is not left without church planting, and church planting, if that is a thing, it's not done apart from gospel preaching.
Yeah, absolutely. I shared when I went on mission trip South America, I saw firsthand just how much a lot of these pastors and a few of their family members really were doing the heavy lifting themselves, and even just a group of people going to help evangelize, you could see kind of encourage and lift some weight off their shoulders. And it was heavy to see, but it was encouraging to see at the same time. So I share the same sentiment. What would you say is the most difficult aspect of this ambitious value?
Yeah, I think the process of church planting involves, building a core group and, activating some basics in terms of the church. You need leadership. You need let's say the mechanisms for worship, for preaching. You need also just the practical thing, like a place to gather, whether that be a school or a theater, some rented space. So all of that requires, some forethought, some thinking, some strategizing. But the most important thing that you need is leadership. You need capable preachers, leaders, church planters who will go and oversee the work, but also labor to build the work. So I was involved in a church planting venture in Central Illinois. So I was trained as a pastor preacher through seminary. So I knew how to do that part of it. I just needed reps to learn how to preach. But there was so much more to church planting than just getting up and preaching on a Sunday, or even doing a membership class or a vision casting meeting. It's meeting with people in the community. It's inviting people to church. It's doing follow up with visitors. It's having the insights to create a small group ministry and small group leaders and train up people that can serve in those capacities, building a children's ministry program as well, and identifying leaders to lead that. And then in time, and this was helpful for me when I was in Central Illinois, I had elders that were part of our mother church that kind of helped me. But then at some point, the umbilical cord needs to be cut, right? And so that was part of my job as well as a church planter, to recruit elders, to find capable, qualified men in accordance with 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1, who can step in and carry the burden of leadership with me. So all of that it's time intensive. It requires financial investment by the church, and the excitement and the enthusiasm about getting behind that, and even sending off quality people like Paul from Antioch to go and to do a work, and that hurts a mother church to kick the chicks out of the nest, so to speak. Yeah. So all of that is a part of the process. But when it works, and when it's done right, and when it's successful, I would say even when it's unsuccessful, to the glory of God, it is satisfying, and it allows us to approach Matthew 28 and this Great Commission with new fervor and new activity, and to celebrate what God does in the midst of a church planting venture. Yeah.
So as a church member, we've kind of focused a fair bit on the leadership side of it. As a church member, be it part of Verse by Verse or some other church, what should our role, what should our responsibility in that be?
I love that question. Good. Pray that the Lord would raise up inside of our church the heart and the finances and the wherewithal to actually plant another church. So, and as opportunities come about, it's not always the opportunity that you thought was going to be there. Yeah. I didn't know I was going to live in Central Illinois. I'm a kid from Central Texas, went to seminary in Chicago. But all of a sudden, through the Lord's working, I ended up planting a church in Central Illinois and loved it, and God used it. And then we were able to plant other churches. So pray that the Lord would move. Pray that the Lord would raise up capable men and women who could be involved in things like this. Obviously, the church planter, a husband-wife team, that's a great pairing. But beyond that too, they can't do it alone. People who would have the foresight and the desire to, move out of their comfort zone, move out of the place where maybe they've lived for several years, to go start a new church elsewhere in another part of the city and another part of the country, or, God help us, maybe even another part of the world.
Awesome. Any final takeaways, final thoughts on this one?
Yeah, this is probably the one of the five that we've fleshed out the least as elders. And even in my own mind, I have experience, and I've seen it done in other places, other organizations around the country that have been involved in this. But it needs a lot of work. It needs a lot of planning, thinking, strategizing. And we're a church plant of 5 years. Yeah. Levi, we're just really, in the grand scheme of things, we're just, toddlers,
Right.
barely getting into kindergarten right now. So, that's an excuse for why that's not fully developed, but I don't want that to be a long-term excuse.
Yeah.
How could we plant a church? We're only 5 years in as our own church plant. No, let's start to kind of set the path now. Let's start to think this through. Let's start to strategize and pray. And, God blessed verse by verse with an awesome church planting opportunity 5 years ago. We're asking the Lord to do that again and to replicate what he did here in San Antonio. And let's see what the Lord does with that.
Absolutely. It's exciting. Thank you for your time, Tony, as always. I do think that's all the time we have today. If you're interested, we were talking about church planting a good bit. We do have a video on church planting you can check out. We'll have it linked here. If you're interested in any other teaching we do, you can go to vbbf.org and check out our live streams on Wednesdays and Sundays. God bless.